Have you ever cared deeply for someone who kept hurting you repeatedly? You knew the relationship was painful, yet somehow leaving felt even harder. I'm Ayan, and Hannah's fictional story may help explain why that happens. Hannah was 29 when she began questioning a relationship she couldn't release. In the beginning, everything felt warm, exciting, attentive, and almost unbelievably effortless. Hannah received affection, reassurance, and attention that made her feel deeply understood. But slowly, that warmth became unpredictable and increasingly difficult for her to understand. Some days brought constant affection, others suddenly brought unexplained distance and silence. After disagreements, Hannah sometimes waited for hours, wondering whether another message would arrive. Then suddenly, her phone would light up. "I'm sorry, I miss you." The relief Hannah experienced during those moments could feel incredibly powerful emotionally. She forgave quickly, believing perhaps things would finally become different this time. For several days, everything might feel wonderful, reassuring, and completely normal again. Then, eventually, the distance, uncertainty, and painful arguments would slowly return. Hannah knew the cycle was hurting her, but leaving still felt incredibly difficult. Whenever painful moments pushed her away, memories of good moments pulled her back. And that contradiction made Hannah question her own judgment again and again. There isn't one simple reason people remain emotionally attached in painful relationships, but several psychological processes can sometimes make separation surprisingly difficult emotionally. One useful concept here is something researchers call intermittent reinforcement. It describes rewarding experiences arriving unpredictably instead of consistently over time. Uncertain rewards can sometimes encourage people to keep seeking another rewarding experience. Hannah never knew when affection would disappear or suddenly return again. So, after painful silence, one loving message could suddenly feel incredibly meaningful. The relationship hadn't necessarily become healthier simply because affection had returned, but the contrast between uncertainty and relief made reconciliation feel especially powerful. Hannah slowly began mistaking emotional intensity for genuine emotional closeness. But intensity isn't intimacy, and chaos isn't necessarily evidence of chemistry. Another part of Hannah's story stretched much further back into her childhood. Growing up, emotional warmth around Hannah had sometimes felt inconsistent as well. Some moments felt loving and connected, others unexpectedly became distant or tense. Hannah learned to notice tiny emotional changes and become careful whenever tension appeared. That childhood didn't automatically determine the relationships Hannah would choose as an adult, but earlier experiences can sometimes influence what later feels emotionally familiar. And familiar doesn't necessarily mean comfortable, safe, healthy, or good for us. For Hannah, inconsistency wasn't completely unfamiliar when it appeared again later on. She already understood the feeling of waiting for emotional warmth to return. Psychology offers several ideas for understanding why familiar relationship patterns sometimes repeat. One idea, sometimes called repetition compulsion, involves returning to familiar emotional patterns. It doesn't explain everyone, but it helped Hannah consider an important possibility. Somewhere inside, she kept thinking, maybe this time things will finally change. If enough love could transform everything, perhaps all her waiting felt worthwhile. That hope became one of the strongest reasons Hannah struggled to leave. She wasn't only attached to the relationship she was actually experiencing, she was also attached to everything she imagined the relationship could become. And sometimes releasing that imagined future can feel incredibly painful too. Harmful relationships can also involve repeated cycles of conflict followed by reconciliation. After emotional pain, reconciliation can sometimes bring an especially powerful sense of relief. That relief can make reconnecting feel deeply meaningful in that particular moment. The term trauma bond is sometimes used specifically within abusive relationship dynamics, but not every difficult or inconsistent relationship should be called a trauma bond. Hope, fear, familiarity, circumstances, isolation, and attachment can all contribute differently. For Hannah, Hope seemed to be one particularly important part of everything. Every apology made her wonder whether the painful pattern had finally ended. Every wonderful weekend made previous difficult days temporarily easier to minimize. But another apology didn't necessarily mean the underlying pattern had actually changed. Eventually, Hannah noticed she felt exhausted, anxious, distracted, and constantly checking her phone. Even peaceful evenings became opportunities to wonder when another message might arrive. One night, Hannah finally asked herself whether she was genuinely happy anymore. For several uncomfortable seconds, she couldn't give herself an honest answer. That silence became more revealing than almost anything Hannah could have said. She asked herself what advice she'd give someone experiencing this exact relationship. Immediately, Hannah knew. Examine the repeated behavior, not simply the latest promise. Yet, giving herself that same advice felt surprisingly difficult and emotionally complicated. So Hannah started recording important incidents, apologies, promises, and her feelings afterwards. Several weeks later, she quietly read everything she'd written from beginning to end. Individual memories seemed confusing, complicated, emotional, and sometimes completely disconnected. But written together, they revealed the same cycle repeating again and again. Hannah realized she wasn't only grieving the relationship she currently had, she was grieving the future she'd spent months imagining it might become. Understanding that didn't instantly erase her attachment, sadness, hope, and good memories. You can recognize something is unhealthy and still genuinely miss someone deeply. Hannah stopped demanding that her feelings disappear simply because her thinking changed. Instead, she began noticing what happened whenever uncertainty triggered her familiar anxiety. Silence made her nervous, while unanswered messages created an urge to chase reassurance. So Hannah practiced something surprisingly uncomfortable: waiting before immediately responding. She walked, journaled, breathed slowly, or simply allowed uncomfortable feelings to pass. She was learning that this comfort didn't always require an immediate reaction. Hannah also began questioning what she had previously considered normal relationship behavior. Attachment theory gave her another useful framework for understanding some of her reactions. Attachment styles aren't diagnoses or permanent labels determining someone's relationship future. Hannah simply used the idea to become more curious about her own patterns. She began asking, is something wrong, or does this uncertainty simply feel familiar? That question didn't solve everything, but it created space before Hannah reacted. Eventually, Hannah established small boundaries around emotionally charged conversations and late-night messages. When those boundaries received resistance, Hannah felt her familiar urge to surrender. This time, she noticed the anxiety but chose to maintain her limits. Hannah understood that boundaries aren't tools for forcing another person to change. They're decisions about what behaviors and situations we choose to participate in. Eventually, Hannah made the difficult decision to finally end the relationship. Ending it didn't magically remove her attachment or erase the beautiful memories. Some nights she missed everything so intensely that she questioned her decision. But Hannah learned that missing someone doesn't automatically mean returning is right. Months later, her phone suddenly displayed, "I've been thinking about you. Can we talk?" Hannah remembered the affection and promises, but then remembered the entire repeating pattern. Old Hannah might have answered immediately. This time, she quietly put down her phone. There was no dramatic speech. She simply chose not to restart what she'd worked hard to leave. Hannah finally understood. Familiar isn't automatically healthy, and intense isn't necessarily intimate. You can miss someone, care deeply, and still choose healthier boundaries for yourself. I'm Ayan, and if this story helped, subscribe for more psychology stories.